Good afternoon and welcome to the first episode of the Divorce Hub Thrive Beyond Divorce podcast. My guest today is Leanne Bamford. Welcome, Leanne.
Hi, Jennifer. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. So, Leanne, you're a social worker in Australia and you've got a great deal of experience working with separated parents and children, which is really the main topic of our discussion today. And that includes about 11 and a half years working in the Family Court of Australia as a family consultant. And prior to that, you worked in child protection, managed a domestic violence crisis service and worked for Defence. Leanne, that's quite a varied resume, but your work in Defence actually involved a few things that are really quite relevant for family law and also our current situation with the COVID-19 coronavirus pandemic. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I would, Jennifer. Thanks. I'd say that all my sort of experience has led me to having a lovely little toolkit of experience and skills working with families, particularly in the divorce and separation area. Particularly with Defence, I did a lot of work working with families when they were separated due to deployment and looking at grief and loss issues, how you cope as a single parent, how you engage with the other person while they're away, promoting children's relationship with that parent. And I also did quite a bit of work around critical incident stress debriefing for incidents such as the Bali bombing, when our flight crews and medical teams came back, that I would debrief them. And there were some other critical, smaller scale critical incidents that occurred where I did the same kind of thing. And it really encouraged my interest in trauma and how people respond to a critical incident and how they process trauma and the differences in how people cope and even surprisingly sometimes people that you may think are quite resilient that responded and fell to pieces, and others that you thought may not cope very well managed to. So it's been an ongoing interest of mine, looking at trauma and incorporating a trauma-informed approach to my practice, working in the sort of family law, divorce and separation arena.
Okay. So, Leanne, would it be fair to say that you're pretty well accustomed to not only working with families, obviously, but working with people when they're going through a crisis?
Yes, I would say that.
And would you think it's fair to say that this current COVID-19 pandemic is a trauma event for our population?
For a good many of our population, it will be. Again, like I said before, surprisingly, some people may float through this and not be particularly affected. But for the majority, I'd say on some level, this will impact, and it will impact on how they cope and how they function on a day-to-day basis.
So is it fairly normal for people to be finding it difficult to cope with even everyday household tasks, being a bit distracted, finding it hard to concentrate on things that would usually be easy, even, work if you're working from home, or even so much as reading a book? Is that a normal response to this kind of situation?
I think it is, Jennifer. I'm seeing a lot of posts and having some conversations with people that are saying that they're finding it difficult to concentrate, and even just to sit down and read a book, they're finding like they ordinarily they sit there and be able to read, and they're just not finding it. They're able to concentrate, and this would suggest that our sense of that fight, flight and freeze response to critical incidents or times when we're in danger gets activated. And what we know of that is that when that's activated, that frontal part of your brain is kind of turned off in a sense, and that's the executive decision-making part of our brain, which does help us to make decisions, helps us to concentrate and take in information and details that we need. But in a flight or fight situation, that part of our brain needs to kind of be disconnected so that we can maintain a sense of safety and either fight or run for it. And so, yes, that's what's happening to a great deal of people. There's so much information. There's concern about our safety. There's concern about our population and their health. There's concern about our economies, concern about whether we're working or not, or whether we'll have work in the future. And so it more than likely has triggered that fight, flight response in us. And so, yes, it is normal that people would be feeling agitated, not able to concentrate, not taking in the minutiae of details, wanting things to get repeated again. You're hearing a lot of people say, oh, the information's not clear, I don't understand. It may not necessarily be, it could be that the messages are not clear, but it also may be our capacity to actually understand and take all this information in all at once.
And I think you've talked with me before about resilience, Leanne, and it's a word that we use a lot in family law when we talk about children being resilient. What are your thoughts around resilience at the moment, both for parents and children?
Absolutely crucial at this point in time, and I think for a good many people, their level of resilience will be tested, and this is part of why you see people coping in different ways. And so depending on your own history and how life has what kind of challenges you may have had in the past, may depend on then how much resilience you have now. So when we're looking at resilience, we're looking at what kind of internal qualities and experience you may have within yourself that's helped you cope with life's challenges and adversities in the past. Looking at sort of what kind of things you've done in the past to help you cope. Looking at your sense of yourself. Looking at what resources that you have available to you that you use outside yourself, such as your family, trusted friends, counsellors, medical practitioners, the sense of safety that you may have in your own community. And these will all contribute to a sense of resilience that will assist you in dealing with the situation that we all find ourselves in at the moment with this pandemic.
And I think one of the things you and I have talked about, which actually led to the idea for this podcast, was that it's a little bit different for some people at the moment. There are people who are having to self-isolate who usually live alone. And there's also parents who have children moving from one household to the other. And I want to turn to that for a minute, Leanne, but I think it's probably relevant for us to talk about some of your personal experience that you can bring to this discussion around your own experience as a separated parent.
Yep.
So you separated from your children's father when they were quite young, isn't that right?
That's correct, Jennifer. Yes, my children were 4 and 6 when we separated, and I'll have to say, thankfully, it was quite an amicable separation. And I moved a little bit closer to my family, and my partner, or my ex-husband at the time, he chose to move overseas for a couple of years. My children now are in their early to mid 30s, and my son has 2 children of his own. And so for the most part, throughout their growing up years, he returned from overseas, but always chose to live interstate. So when they went and spent time with their father, it was packing them up, putting them on a plane and sending them interstate. So I was quite alone, and they would often go for a block time. And so I'd end up, so for example, most Christmases, I'd end up spending 3 to 4 weeks on my own while they were spending time with their father.
And I guess I have a similar experience. I separated from my son's father about 8 years ago. So whilst I'm a family lawyer and mediator and parenting coordinator, I'm also a separated parent. And one of the things that really struck me is this afternoon, my son goes to his dad's house for the school holidays. So I won't see him for almost 2 weeks in person. He'll be spending an extended period of time there, which is great. We have a fantastic co-parenting relationship. We worked really hard to get there, but we've managed to do it. But what it means for me is that I won't have my son in my home now for an extended period of time. And that's not something I've ever really had to contemplate, because over the last 8 years, I've developed a range of coping mechanisms to adjust to the times that he's not with me.
Yep.
So, for instance, right now I should be heading overseas for a conference, but obviously that's been cancelled. In the school holidays at Christmas, we take turns to have a long block of time with our son, so we can each take a holiday. And if it's not my year to do that, I usually take a break myself and go on holiday, because family law shuts down at Christmas. So I find ways that I can occupy my time for those longer stretches and effectively distract myself. Shorter stretches like the weekends, I've usually saved all my social occasions for the weekends I don't have my son, although he's getting a bit older now, and he has his own social life. So I'm actually getting 2 weekends to do things now. But as I'm an extrovert and I need to be around people, it's the way that extroverts get their energy. And all of those coping mechanisms that I've had of going to movies with friends, catching up for dinner, going to the gym, even so much as a weekly catch up with my parents, going out to the local Thai restaurant for dinner. I can't do any of that anymore. And now I'm staring down the barrel of almost 2 weeks of no human contact in person at all, because we're self-isolating. So I feel like I'm not going to be the only person in this situation. And that's why I reached out to you to have a chat about this, because I thought you might have some ideas that can help not just me, but also other people who are looking at that situation and might not realise that, it's going to be different this time around. Even if they've done it before, it's going to be different. So I wonder if you could share with us some of your ideas about things that I can do, that other people can do, to cope with that aloneness.
Yeah, okay, thanks. Yeah, look, I think there are going to be a good many separated parents who choose or are on their own that'll be in the same boat around this time. One of the things I think we need to understand as to why we may struggle with this is that we are social beings. Our brains are actually hardwired for us to connect and to relate and to form relationships and to create a sense of being part of relationships or of a group or of a club or our work environment. And so a great deal of those mechanisms are not going to be available to us due to social isolation. And so that, like you're saying, a lot of those resources and things and things that you did that created your sense of resilience and how you coped when your child wasn't there is not available to you right now. And I think it becomes quite a confronting, and for some people it could actually be quite an anxious and a frightening time.
And so we were talking about your situation when your children were young, and
Yes.
When Dad would come and the kids would have long stretches of time with him, as I guess with your social worker hat off and your mum hat on, how did you cope with that situation?
Well, I think I probably look back and reflect on it with my social worker hat on, but certainly at the time, I remember the first time that they went and spent a considerably long time with their father. He'd just come back from overseas, so obviously he was very keen to connect with the kids, having been away for a couple of years, and requested, that, he hadn't had a couple of Christmases with them either, so he wanted to spend Christmas with them. Our daughter's birthday is also 2 days before Christmas, so and so I thought, this is reasonable and great. I've just had 2 years of 24/7, 365 days of my children. Glad to send them off. And so they went just a little bit before Christmas. My daughter celebrated her birthday with Dad. They had Christmas, and I felt a little bit empty and missed them and figured, well, that's kind of normal. That's all right. So I limped through Christmas. And sort of got to the other end of Christmas and kind of thought, hang on, I can't play touch footy at the moment because we're on a break. There's not even any practice. A lot of my friends have packed up and gone away on holidays, and I actually found myself on my own, alone, not necessarily lonely, but on my own. And I actually got quite depressed to the point where I felt I needed to go and see my doctor. And so we addressed that, and we thought that it might be a good idea if I went and spoke to a counsellor. And when I was speaking to him, and actually I continued to see this counsellor for some time, even after the children returned. And I was saying to my counsellor, I don't understand why there are times when I will plan a weekend away where I just get away by myself, and I plan for my parents to have the kids, and we've got a holiday house about an hour away, and I said, I'll go up there, there'll be no phone, no television, long walks along the beach, and I said, I'm fine. And yet when the kids went to their father, I was a mess. And what we worked out was, and this was my aha moment, and where things sort of changed for me, was I realised that going on the weekend on my own was my choice. Having my children, as logically and as wonderful as, and I accept that them going and spending time with their father was not the issue, it still wasn't my choice to be alone under those circumstances. And that was the root of the issue for me, and why I didn't respond so well while they were away with their father.
Okay, so it's about choice then, choice and control.
Yes, yes. And I think this is the thing that you're going to find, and we're, as a community and as individuals at the moment, we don't have a great deal of choice. This pandemic has led to a situation where I don't know any country that hasn't had a government make some kind of directive that we must socially isolate. And like I said before, we're wired to connect, we're wired to be in relationships and being part of things. And all of a sudden, all those mechanisms that we would ordinarily use that maintain our sense of connectedness, other than the internet and the television, have been taken away from us through no choice necessarily of our own. Yes, we choose to abide by those directives, and we know why we do that, because we want to keep ourselves safe and we want to protect our vulnerable. But there is still that essence of we don't have a choice. This pandemic has impacted on our lives to the point where we are now stuck at home, not doing the things that we would ordinarily do that define who we are.
It's really interesting. I'm just thinking back to last Sunday. I've had a rule for a couple of years that Sunday is a slow Sunday, self-care, slow Sunday. It's, if you were religious, it would probably be called the Sabbath. And I don't do anything on Sunday that starts with should. I should be doing this, or I should be doing that. And I've done it to force myself to slow down and to spend time alone, spend time at home, not doing very much at all. If my son's with me, we might go out to see a movie, spend some time together without devices. If it's me on my own, I might listen to an audio book or do a cryptic crossword. But and I've always really relished those days, and it's been a great way for me to just slow down and never end up with Mondayitis, because I've had this day of just doing whatever I want without any constraints and not feeling like there's something else I should be doing.
That's a good self-care practice, Jennifer. Good,
yes,
well done.
And it's been really, really good for me. Except last Sunday, it just didn't work for me. Because I think it felt like, oh, this is my new normal. This is what I'm doing all the time now. There's no novelty to it at all. And I was staring down the barrel of, oh, I could be doing this for months. And even though I like it, there was some resentment around that.
That's because, as we said, you chose to have those Sundays where it was your downtime. It was time just for you. And when we have that sense of choice and that locus of control, and we have a purpose to why we've made those choices, it works. But now like you say, every Sunday, every day is almost a Sunday. And so it's not about self-care, it's more about self-preservation at the moment. And so again, it's that whole issue around choice, and then how we respond to that perception of what kind of control we may or may not have in our lives.
So choice and loss of control. So I guess, you know, we need to be looking at things differently and looking at where we've got control. So I might not have control about leaving the house on the weekend, but I can control smaller things about what I do. Like maybe if I have a nap on the weekend.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that's the thing we need to be encouraging everybody to do, is accept the fact that, right, this is for however long our situation. We will be self-isolating, and we will be spending many, many, many days at home. And for quite a lot of us, on our own, particularly as a single parent. And so, as you say, child goes to spend time with the other parent, and you are completely on your own. So you need to perhaps narrow down what your focus of control can be around. And this is what we do when we're dealing, when I'm working with clients and problem solving. It is about understanding what their sense or perceived sense of control is in their life, and then perhaps just taking it one day at a time or half an hour at a time, and just looking at what choices you have and what control you have there. So it could be around, you know, what time I decide to get up in the morning, you know, whether I get out of my pajamas and get into my daytime pajamas, or, you know, how many hours I'm going to work if I still have work available for me. You know, and then think about, right, well, I've got X amount of time. What am I going to do with that? What are the things that I've said, oh my gosh, I'd love to do blah, 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 but I've never had time. Well, now you do have the time. And so they're the choices you can make. Around one of the things I think will stop some people, and I'm hearing it, is that, you know, I'm saying, oh, I've got all this time, I've got all these books to read, but I can't concentrate. And again, that's recognizing the stress and the anxiety that this situation has put us in, normalizing that that's an okay response, and then perhaps doing something like deep breathing, or some meditation, or journaling, or something to recognize and externalize how you're feeling, that may then help you to gain a sense of control.
And I think it's being kind to yourself. And if you're struggling to read, an audiobook can be a great alternative. It's less effort involved, and it can be quite soothing. Personally, I used audiobooks to cure a bout of insomnia, and I love just lying on my bed listening to an audiobook as I go to sleep at night, or if I choose to take a nap. Actually, I found napping to be quite an effective way to pass the time on the weekend too. I do like naps. But I think you've touched on some things there, is picking up on activities that you enjoy. And you were mentioning to me that there's an activity you enjoy that you just haven't had time for, that you're thinking about taking up again.
Yes. I love painting and drawing, and I got fully into it a couple of years ago after I'd had some major surgery, and it was just a tremendous therapeutic activity. And as I became well, and as work picked up and I got really busy, that kind of went by the by. And at the beginning of this year, I had decided that this year was going to be a year I'd get back into painting. And, you know, by the end of February, I still hadn't had time and hadn't made any you know, time on the weekends or anything. So that is one of the things that once my work does start to slow up, that I intend to get into. One, because I enjoy it, but art is also quite a therapeutic activity that does assist the brain to process things like depression, anxiety, traumatic responses to critical incidents. So there's a couple of reasons why I particularly want to pick up that interest again.
Well, I'll be looking forward to seeing your paintings. I think one of the things I'm going to do is cook the food that I want to eat. Put as much chili in as I want.
Absolutely. And I think that was one of the things when I was trying to cope with these block times when I had the children away, and I didn't have a lot of people around, you know, mainly because it was Christmas and they'd all gone on holidays, was things like, for example, my son doesn't like mushrooms and I love mushrooms. And he was uncanny. I'd make up a casserole and I'd sneak a few mushrooms in, and you guarantee he'd find them. So one of the things that I would tell myself that I could celebrate and I could do while they're away was to eat the foods that I like. And you know, that I wouldn't necessarily do while the children are there. So yes, that's a good thing. Eat as much chili as you want to, Jennifer.
I will be, but you can keep your mushrooms, because I'm with your son. My mother tried for years to sneak mushrooms into food, and one bite and I'm absolutely with your son on this one. But something else that you mentioned a bit earlier, and I'd like to pick up that theme again, is the difference between loneliness and aloneness. Can you just expand on that a bit more?
Yeah, happy to. And again, that counselling that I had during that initial Christmas period that I spoke about before, one of my other aha moments was around understanding the difference between aloneness and loneliness. You can be lonely in a relationship. You can be lonely in a crowded room. You can feel lonely, you know, in your work environment. But, you know, people would perceive that you're not alone. And the other thing is that what I discovered was that society doesn't really have a very positive view of aloneness, of people being on their own. You know, my experience and my daughter's experience, actually, because she chooses to be on her own, is that people are often quite uncomfortable with the idea that you're not in a relationship. Or you know, that you don't have a special friend or what have you. And we have, you know, there's certain kind of negative names that are attributed to people on their own, like, you know, hermit or you know, bag lady, spinster,
or the cat lady.
Yes, well, you know, and we often joke that, you know, we're going to end up old with, you know, a bunch of cats. So if society's not perceiving it as a particularly positive situation to be in, it doesn't help the person who is alone to reconcile that they are alone. And this brought me then to thinking, and this is where we're getting a little bit deep, but to that whole idea of the relationship I have with myself and how comfortable, you know, I am in being on my own. And I struggled with that for many, many years, I have to say. I'm very much at peace with it now. And so I anticipate that this pandemic is going to possibly confront quite a few people with that whole idea of being alone and being comfortable on their own.
And I think that is going to be a struggle for a lot of people. And there's another side of it, I guess, I see as the family lawyer, is the parent dilemma. The parent who may have done the majority of the parenting before the family separated, whilst the other parent might have gone out to work, finds themselves in a situation where they may be separated from their children for a longer period of time, and there can be a sense of identity wrapped up in the roles that people play in a marriage that can continue after separation. And I find a lot of people identify with being a mum or a dad primarily, and in a sense, this is being taken away from them. We're in a crisis situation where they would usually see themselves as the rescuer, but their kids aren't with them. And, you know, I wonder if you think people are going to struggle with that and what they might be able to do.
Oh, absolutely. I think that's the case. And I think to a lesser degree, they probably are confronted with that each time, you know, their child or children go to see the other parent. You know, you lose that kind of daily role of being a mother or a father, which we incorporate into our identity of who we are. But we manage it when it's just like it's time limited. And when we can also have access to those other resources that help us to cope when we're on our own. But this will be accentuated now, I would suggest, during this period. You know, if children aren't going to see the other parent, we don't know how long it might be for. And when we don't have access to those other activities or techniques that we use to cope, we will, I think, feel a very strong sense of a loss of identity around, you know, being a parent, particularly if we value that role and as part of who we are.
And I think another aspect of it is that some parents have different parenting values from each other. That's quite common, particularly with separated families, and sometimes that can lead to the breakdown of the relationship. And there's an element of fear at the moment where people are sending their children to have time with or live with the other parent, but worried about whether or not that parent is going to be as vigilant as they might be, and will the children be okay? And the family court's telling us if there's court orders in place, you really have to stick with them. So there are parents who, again, the choice is taken away from them. You know, they're worried about what happens in the other house. How do they cope with that? Do they need to let it go? And if so, how do they let it go?
Look, it's really hard, and I kind of smiled when you were talking about that, because it reminded me of, again, my personal situation. My ex-husband is a farmer, and you know, was living on the family farm, and so I packed my kids up, and not only would I send them interstate so that they weren't just 5 minutes away, they went to a property that, in my mind, had a lot of dams that weren't necessarily appropriately fenced. And without sounding too unkind, my ex-husband's driving record wasn't fabulous. And he'd had a number of accidents where he'd run up the back of somebody. And so, and of course, being out in a rural area, he was on the roads a lot with the kids. And so I constantly, for some years, had this fear that I was going to get a phone call to say there'd been a car accident, or that they'd lost the kids and found them in the dam. And it was a terrible struggle. And I had to sort of have this internal conversation with myself and say, you know, no matter what I may think of him, he loves our children, and he would never intentionally hurt them, or he would never intentionally neglect them. And I just have to trust that that's enough. And thankfully it was. I recall a time when the kids rang up one time, and the property that their father had was in rural Victoria, and he'd taken the kids to Canberra. And I got a phone call and said, "Oh, hi, Mummy, guess where we are?" And I said, "Oh, where are you?" And they said, "Canberra." And I said, "Oh, how did you get there?" And said, "Oh, we drove in Daddy's ute." And I thought, they're both tiny. The younger of the two children probably ought to have had a car seat, and I knew he wouldn't have had one. And I thought, do I ring and make a big issue with this, or do I just trust that he's doing the best he can? And I chose the latter, and it all worked out. And it's not easy, but I think at some point you do have to trust the other parent that, you know, they won't intentionally put their child in danger or hurt them.
And the reality is that every day the government's stepping up the measures to enforce this social isolation, and there's fines that are going to be handed out, and everyone is doing the best that they can in
Absolutely.
A situation where this is all really new and different for all of us, and we're all feeling a lack of control. I wonder if we could talk about children a bit more now. We've talked about parents and parents coping, but things are different for kids now. And thinking about littlies, 3 and 4 year olds. I've got a lot of friends who are trying to work from home, and that's challenging with little kids around. I'm just trying to make sure the cat doesn't jump up and knock the camera down. But little kids are used to running off their energy. Playgrounds are closed. We've been told kids can't go to playgrounds. How do you entertaining a 3 or 4 year old in a house is going to be challenging.
Mm.
How do we help them to be okay? But also, how do we keep that relationship going with the other parent who might not see them as regularly when, trying to get a little kid on a FaceTime call for anything more than a few minutes is absolutely challenging.
Yeah. A couple of things there, Jennifer. One, I think, on the assumption that the parents hopefully do communicate reasonably well, there may need to be a conversation and a decision as to how you're going to explain our current world situation to a little person, or to any age. Look at what's age appropriate for whatever age your children are. I have a 4-year-old grandson, and he's obsessed with washing his hands at the moment. He thinks that's the best thing since sliced bread. So we're not discouraging that.
No.
But one of the challenges that my son was complaining about the other day is that they all ordinarily have screen time limitations. And he just kind of sort of threw his arms up and said, "Oh, Mum, at the moment, he's just obsessed with Bluey, and I can't remember the other child's." And he said, "And I'm just letting him watch it because it's just peace." And he said, "I'm just needing to be available also when he gets can you come and play with me, Dad?" And he said, "I'm trying to write job applications at the moment because he's been stood down at the moment." And so, it's a struggle. They've got a 12-year-old. He's far more aware of the world, and he actually does tend to have a little bit of anxiety. And he's quite an intelligent kid. So it's having to decide, to speak about this pandemic in a pragmatic way, in a factual way with him, encourage him to research and find out what he can find out, and looking for age appropriate resources there. Behind the News is a program that's run by our Australian ABC, which is a news program for children, and I came across that the other day, and it's quite informative. So then, in my son's situation, he's not separated, but then you add on to them not only entertaining these children and trying to explain to them in an age appropriate way why Mummy and Daddy are home and they're stuck at home and can't go to the park. There's that other issue of trying to continue to promote the relationship with the other parent. And like you say, 4-year-olds are a little flibbity gibbets, and you'll get 30 seconds of concentration and then they'll be off. So again, parents need to negotiate what's going to be age appropriate and what is possible. Again, there's choices here. We have some control around how we can continue to promote a child's relationship with the parent. And it would be using things like FaceTime, telephone, maybe encouraging kids to write a letter or do a drawing, either post it or at least have it that they can show, when they do FaceTime, look, Mummy, look, Daddy, I've done you a painting, or
take a photo of it and help the child send it to the other parent.
Absolutely. Yeah. Back in the day when my kids were young, we didn't have FaceTime or anything like that. It was just telephone. And of course, overseas telephone calls were incredibly expensive back in those days. So to make the most of the time when they did speak to Daddy, we had a list on the fridge. And so there was my daughter's list and my son's list, and they were things that they were going to talk to Daddy about when he rang. So during the week or weeks, one of them might come home and say they got 10 out of 10 for a spelling. Oh, that's fabulous. Why don't you put it on the list so you can remember to tell Dad? It was a message that talking to Dad was a positive thing, that it was something we were going to positively anticipate. And it was also a mechanism in which they had things they could talk. Because, how many times do you say to your child, "How was your day?" "Oh, it's all right." "What you do?" "Not much." And this was happening with my kids. And I thought so there are things that we can do that will help continue that connectedness and maintain that relationship with the other parent if it comes to the point where it's going to be a long time before they see them again.
And I think that there's really responsibility on the parent who's away from the children, not to just to be in control of their emotions when they're speaking with the children, and not upset the children about them being apart. And that could really have an upsetting effect on children.
Absolutely. There's a difference between saying to a child, look, I really miss you, to then going, oh, Daddy, well, Mummy's really sad, and oh, I just, I wish I could see you and I can't do anything about it, because that tends to prevail to the child a message that they need to try and help Mummy and Daddy feel better. And that's a reverse of the roles. The parent here is helping and taking responsibility for the emotional well-being of the child. It's not an invitation for the child to, meet their needs. And that can subtly happen at times. And I think we do need to think about how we're saying things and what we're saying to the children during these times. So that's a good point.
Another thing that came to mind when you were talking about your list on the fridge, there's a book that I've recommended to many clients over the years. It's called Mom's House, Dad's House, Parenting Your Children from Two Homes. It's by Dr. Isolina Ricci. And one of the things that she talks about doing is, when your children aren't with you, to have a jar. And when you think of something that makes you think of your child, writing it on a little piece of paper and putting it in the jar. And it might be, I saw a butterfly today, and it made me think of you because I know how much you love butterflies. Positive things, and yes, obviously age appropriate things, and putting the day on it and putting it in the jar. And then when the child comes back, or the children come back to that household, having a bit of a sort of ceremony where you pull out the jar and you go through and read them together. And the philosophy behind that was, it's an icebreaker into for the transition between homes, but it also lets that child know that they weren't out of sight, out of mind, that mum or dad was thinking of them when they weren't there, and there's positive things to talk about.
I really like that. And it's also a message that even though they weren't physically together, that relationship continued. And I think it also helps children to realise that being away from mummy or daddy doesn't necessarily mean that relationship it doesn't exist, that it can continue even in a symbolic way. So I really like that.
Just thinking out loud, it could also continue via FaceTime. People could do a similar sort of thing, and that would be something that would engage younger children, perhaps, as they see it as a thing we're doing. We're not just, oh, I'm talking to mummy, I'm talking to daddy, I'm being asked lots of questions. It's, hey, let's look at the special jar and go through it. That's another way that people could make those screen times with each parent work, so that there's something to occupy
it. Gives it kids are pretty task orientated, so that's a really good suggestion. And I would also suggest that particularly our littlies, but I don't know, it could be sort of caveman 13-year-old boy as well, who grunts, a short but more frequent Skype or FaceTime, that may only be 2 or 3 minutes. The message is that mummy or daddy was thinking of you, just wanted to hear your voice. It allows the child to hear your voice. It allows the child to see your face. Most kids, particularly younger ones, and certainly babies, are only interested in seeing your face. That's where they get their social cues and their emotional cues. And so FaceTime and Skype and those kind of things are actually set up and are quite age appropriate in that sense. They don't get the cuddle, and there's nothing that replaces a bear hug from mummy or daddy. But certainly in these situations, and again, it's about choice, it's about deciding what resources you have available that you can use to continue to maintain the child's relationship with both parents.
I think another thing is for those older children, and I might have a 13-year-old that's quite happy to self-isolate with a computer, is choosing to let go of control of the screen time a bit, and choosing to communicate with them in their way. They are all online. They're using their apps and things. And up until now, I think a lot of us have been quite resistant to that. Come and talk to me and have a proper conversation. And I think it's choosing to do things in a way that works for them so that we maintain the relationship rather than trying to push them to do it differently.
Oh, and it is. It's about getting familiar with what they're growing up with and what's normal for them. I remember a father telling me one time, he said, I was really worried that my son wasn't doing anything with his friends. And he said, I went into his room and said, mate, you're not doing anything with your friends. And he said, yeah, I am. And he said, what are you doing? He said, I'm playing games now. And there was a bunch of them that were on, communicating and that's how they socialise these days. It's not how we did it. And so then he realised that when he doesn't spend time with his son, one of the ways that he could connect was to get online and play a game with him.
Yeah.
And they play the game and they chat. And he said, I started to find out all sorts of things in his life that he couldn't be bothered telling me when it was just a direct conversation that had no activity or necessarily a purpose in the child's eyes. Yeah. So it is about going with the times and not necessarily, realising that our children are being socialised in a completely different way to the way in which we were. I'd certainly still encourage, lots of social activities, not during the pandemic, of course, but at other times. But yes, we've got to find these other creative ways to connect with our kids.
I think the flip side, though, of all of that is coming back to my slow Sundays and device-free days, is that it's not just kids who need a break from screen time. Families and households really need to take a day off social media and the news, because we're just being bombarded with it. And I've seen the term hypervigilism being used. We're constantly on high alert with that fight, flight or freeze response. And even little kids aren't oblivious to mum and dad's reactions to that, are they?
No. And little children in particular will pick up the vibe, the sense that, things are not quite right. They might not quite understand what it is, but, there's a particular way that the news is being presented. A lot of the media tends to still be a bit sensationalist. And at times, don't necessarily report the positive things, but it's more the doom and gloom. And if they're witnessing their parents glued to the TV and responding to it, in a, isn't this awful kind of approach, kids will pick that up. And children, particularly our littlies, probably, sort of up to early primary school age, won't necessarily have words for the feelings that they are experiencing. And so what do kids do when they don't have words? They act out, they behave. And so if the behaviour is out of character or it's perceived as naughty behaviour, then they get punished. And so the child then feels, well, I'm getting punished for something I don't really understand. So again, it's about being very present, very emotionally available to your child, and understanding developmentally where they're at and how they're programming the world and understanding it at the moment. And then modelling the behaviour you want them to exhibit, and modelling how to cope, how to respond to our ever-changing and unpredictable world. And I mean, as adults, we're struggling. So, why would we expect children to be coping?
And
hypervigilism. Sorry, Jennifer, but that hypervigilism, you're quite right. That was sort of the other part of the question. It is very much around that fight, flight, and freeze response, which, like we spoke at the beginning, is quite normal given the critical and ever-changing situation we find ourselves in. And again, it's about recognising that that's what's happening for us, and then having some kind of an internal conversation about, all right, what do I need to do so I'm managing that, and so that I can help my little person manage it as well.
because we can't just send the kids off to play at the park and
No.
burn off that energy. I think there's a reason why schools have a couple of breaks a day, because kids sitting down on task. Oh, there we go. The dog's decided to join us. Someone's walking past your house, aren't they?
I say they're coming to my door, but anyway.
Right. They can't just go and work off all that energy, and so they're in the same boat as us, but they're just smaller humans than us. Or, well, in some cases, mine's actually taller than me now. But I think we need to understand it. What you're saying is that kids are struggling with this just as much, but they don't have the words to put around it that we have.
They don't have the words. They don't have the experience. And they don't even at times have the cognitive maturity to cope with a constantly changing and at times overwhelming experience. So what will happen is that they will feel stressed and they will produce, a level of cortisol, as most of us do in a stressed situation. But again, because they don't have the experience, they don't have those words, they will act it out. And that's where we need to understand, when they do decide to have a major meltdown because they wanted a milkshake and you said no, or a seemingly small thing when they absolutely have that horrendous meltdown. That this isn't actually about the incident that they appear to be responding to. They're just overwhelmed and fed up.
So what's something if little Johnny or Mary's throwing a tantrum, and mum and dad just it's all too much for them. They're looking for work, they're stressed, and they just want to sit and rock in the corner. What are some things that mum and dad can do to cope themselves in that situation and help the kids cope?
Yeah. Look, it's hard when it's happening to you and it all gets a bit sort of overwhelming. But one of the very simple things you can do is just stop and breathe. And breathe, deep breaths. So there's research out that suggests that neurobiologically our brains, particularly around what chemicals we are producing under critical situations, will positively change, if we just stop and take a deep breath, count to 5, exhale, count to 5, and do that 4 times. That's all it takes. If you can spend time and do it for longer. And if you're doing that for yourself to calm yourself down, and you're demonstrating that to your child in a calm and way, the child will then pick up that this is effective way of being able to manage and self-soothe. You're encouraging self-soothing, self-regulating, not just for your child, but for yourself. So that's just a very simple thing that you can do. If it's looking at the fact that they've got too much energy, or they might be feeling angry. Anger is pent up energy. So maybe a punching bag if you've got one available. If you don't, I've heard of somebody getting a tea towel and just rolling it up and giving it to the child and just encouraging them to just hit the carpet. Good way of cleaning carpet. Just acknowledging that there's that energy there that needs to get rid of. My son's got a walking machine, so he's got both the kids walking on that. Nice. At varying levels of speed, of course, but that's one way they're getting rid of their energy.
Yeah. So Leanne, before we wrap up, I just thought we might circle back around to our original discussion about the parent who's alone with no children and some positive things that they could choose to do. And I just thought we might just brainstorm some of those things. And you did touch on some of them earlier. For me, Netflix is an easy option. I'm discovering all sorts of great new shows, and there's a lot of streaming services which have free trials. Reading a book or listening to an audio book, doing crosswords. And I know there's a lot of people taking up things like learning how to crochet and getting on YouTube and finding out how to do things. I could probably spend some time learning how to fix the towel rail that fell off the wall, but I'm not at that point yet. So it's just gonna stay on the bathroom floor for a bit longer. I think there's there's a culture in Australia around drinking and wine o'clock and people cracking open a bottle of wine to try and forget and cope with things. And it feels like that's probably not a good idea and that you might have some better suggestions.
Yeah. I love a drink. I love a good wine. But one of the things I decided after I got my social work degree and knowing that I was a sole parent was that I would not come home after a bad day and have a drink, because it would be all too easy for that to become my coping mechanism, and one drink would then lead to 2 to 3, etc., etc. So I've never done that. May open a box of chocolates and eat that, which is probably not so great for my hips. So we've got to acknowledge that there may be some, and there are lots of jokes at the moment around at the moment, about, drinking just to cope, and I don't find them funny, and that's not me being prudish. I just find it quite concerning. So this kind of things that we have to acknowledge. You have to have some awareness that this isn't great, and maybe I'm not coping quite as well. I'm trying to juggle homeschooling my kids and keep my business running, or write job applications, or I'm concerned about my partner who's looking like she might be a bit depressed or what have you, and think, well, what can I do? Again, it's around choice. It's around that locus of control. One of the things I used to do a lot, particularly when life was throwing me a few curveballs, was journal. I don't seem to journal quite as much when things are going well for me, though I did try to sort of keep at least a gratitude journal then, where I might just write 5 things that I was grateful for at the end of the day. But as soon as it became apparent that this pandemic was going to hit us the way it has, and that I was going to be home, and bearing in mind that I live on my own, except for my cat and dog, I went out and bought a book. I bought it in my favourite colour, and it is just specifically my pandemic journal. And every night I write in it. It's not to anybody other than, I write it as if someone else is going to read it, but I have no intention of sharing it particularly with anyone. And it's a way of externalizing my thoughts and my feelings. It's a way of me processing how I may have dealt with the day and what have you. And it occurred to me, I think a couple of days ago, just how surreal this situation that we're in. And I'd heard other people sort of talk about it, but for whatever reason, it's taken me a few days to reach that. So I just wrote about that and what that actually meant to me, and why was it feeling surreal, and and I haven't really thought about it since. So journaling, I think, is a very good way. It's like having your own personal therapist in a way, and so I would certainly encourage that. And we talked about, like you said, that I was going to try and paint at some stage. One of the other things on my list when I get time is I want to clean out my office, because it's become a bit of my office at home, because it's a bit of a dumping ground, or has been. There are other things, like you might want to learn a language. There's a lot of online sort of programs that are coming on board and being offered. There's still a lot of people offering aerobics and other sort of Pilates and what have you online now. So it is about just being creative and thinking about what kind of things are available to you that you have some choice around engaging in.
Yeah, and maybe picking up those hobbies that have gone by the wayside. So for me, I've got a musical background, but I've very much lapsed in terms of playing. So I think it's time for me to get back on the piano. I'm not sure if the isolated neighbours would appreciate my saxophone skills. But there's also things like pub choir, which is a lot of people have probably heard of, but they're doing couch choir, and they're doing that again. It was so successful the first time around, and I've spoken to a few people about it, and they said, oh no, I don't want to send my video in, but you don't have to. You can actually just record it on your couch and just keep it for yourself, like your journal. You don't have to show it to anyone.
Yep.
But it's helping be part of a community. I also found out about an app the other day called House Party. It's a free app, and you join it and connect with other friends who are on there. And you can chat with people by video or by texting when they're in the house. And it occurred to me there's lots of people who are having catch-ups on Zoom and Skype and things. But
Yep.
it occurred to me that if you're the person at home on your own, there may be that feeling of, oh, but look, everyone else will be busy. I don't want to intrude on them and make them feel like they have to look after me. But with this app, it actually notifies people when you're in the house. So people can choose to come and interact with you. And I noticed one of the people, I had a few notifications come through the other day. And one of the people who's always in the house is the friend who's currently got COVID-19 and is self-isolating at home. So that's how he's keeping connected to people, and doesn't have to, phone them and go, oh God, they might be working or whatever. So that's a really soft way, I guess, to get that interaction with people without, if you're worried about imposing.
I think that's a great idea. And then people are aware that, oh yes, so-and-so's at home and they're available to have a chat. They're indicating that they're, open to being contacted. And I think that's really good. I think a mutual friend of ours is exploring an app called Marco Polo, and I think it might be a similar kind of thing. It's a chat thing where you identify that you're available, and or you can invite. And I think with that one you can actually, I think, connect with them retrospectively. I haven't quite worked it out yet because.
Okay.
But I think we'll find that there'll be a lot more of these kind of apps and mechanisms that are going to promote communication and connectedness while we stay in our houses, and we have to make the most of it. That's what we've got. There are our resources available to us at the time.
We're fortunate that we have the technology.
Oh, definitely.
I wanted to touch on the potential dark side of doing all these new activities or picking things up. And I saw something posted on social media this morning, and I can't remember the title of it, but it was about not feeling pressured to have all this self-improvement and being industrious during this pandemic. And I think it's important that if you want to spend some time learning French or Spanish, great, but we don't, or crochet a rug, that's fantastic, but we shouldn't feel pressured to emerge from the COVID-19 situation being absolutely better versions of ourselves with all these new skills. If that's not where you're at, I think that's okay, but I feel like you can probably put that into much more professional terms than I have.
Well, I mean, the thing is, I'm not going to be Wonder Woman at the end of this, in either shape or in capacities. And yes, we don't want to be pressured into meeting some kind of benchmark that we perceive is being prescribed to us. At the end of the day, it is all our own personal experience. And, some might just really love the idea of blobbing and not doing much at all. Not necessary for the whole span of the time, but I'm not particularly interested in learning a language. I should. There's that word should that you talked about before, while I have the opportunity, because I'm hoping to go back to France next year. But I just don't think I've got the capacity anymore to take it on. So it's about being realistic. It's about what you can do. It's about what you enjoy. And it's nobody's business but yours as to what you get out of this. And what kind of person you want to be at the end of this. And I would say that for most of us, we want to be, or not a worse person anyway, and having, sort of coming out of this worse for wear. But certainly let's look and share our stories, but not compare. When we start to compare ourselves with other people that might be on social media going, look at me, I'm fantastic, I'm doing French and I'm doing Spanish and I'm learnt to crochet and da-da-da-da. When we start to compare, we start to judge. And we judge ourselves and we start to judge other people. Now's not the time for judgment. Now's the time for empathy. And we need to be clear that when we're sharing at the moment, we're sharing because we want understanding and we want connectedness and we want acceptance. This is a pretty crappy time and we need to do whatever we can to survive.
And be comfortable with ourselves.
Absolutely, yes. One of the lessons that I learned through that critical sort of Christmas time that I talk about, it really was quite a lovely turning point for me. And it probably took me on about an 18-month journey around counselling and looking at, you know, my relationship with myself and what have you. And one of the books that I read around that time was a book called Intimacy and Solitude. It's written by an Australian called Stephanie Dowrick. Her surname is Dowrick. And really, the essence of the book is that you've got to learn to love yourself before you can love anyone else. And what I also took away from it was that that if I don't have any choice around being on my own, or even if I do choose to be on my own, that I need to have an okay relationship with myself and you know, enjoy my own company. And it was a wonderful book around exploring some of those aspects. Now that might be getting a bit deep for some people, but it may assist. And you can get it online. Booktopia here in Australia have it, and you can order it, and you can have it in a couple of days. And I've recommended it to quite a few people, particularly when they've started to become conscious that that whole being alone as opposed to lonely. And seeking some kind of meaning around the relationship they have with themselves. And it was a really good book.
So, Leanne, in closing, I think the key message here is that we can choose what we can control. There are some things that we can't control, which we need to let go of, but we need to look for those things that we can control and make the choices within that locus of control that we have. And something you mentioned to me recently was a Japanese sign. Can you just explain that as we conclude?
Yeah, well, given that one of my sort of interests has been trauma and a trauma-informed response practice and assisting people responding to crises, I obviously have quite a few textbooks and what have you around that. And one of the books that I've got around crisis management has the Japanese character for crisis on the front of it. However, it also means opportunity. And I think that's a wonderful way of being able to sort of re-script or reshape our understanding of our situation at the moment. Yes, we are in a crisis, but wow, we have such opportunities ahead of us. And we're seeing that happen. You know, we've got lots of medical practitioners, our governments, other people finding systems and ways, you know, grasping opportunities, creating opportunities so that we can respond to this crisis. And we can do that in our small, minute household ways, individual ways. We can see what opportunities this crisis is going to provide and present to us.
Well, Leanne, thank you very much for being our very first guest and for the insights that you've shared. I hope that one day we can have another chat at the end of this crisis/opportunity and talk about, you know, how it is as a, you know, after it. Where have we got to since then? But thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to seeing you virtually again.
Yes, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity, Jennifer. Bye for now.